The Big Sale Illuminati, where some of the best in the business discuss what's worked, what's working, and what's failed in selling big sales. Our panel of experts includes Clarity Seeker, a black belt of brands, our snarky marketer, Monique de Maio. CEO to CEO selling is his game. Fortune 500 in his lane. The Lex Luthor of the close, Mark Kennedy. The effective executive, a force on the boards, a buyer on fire, Tiffany Olson. David versus Goliath selling, the prince of process, Sun Tzu of big sales strategy, Tom Searcy. And that's your panel. Now it's time to talk about big sales.
Well, hello, everybody. This is the Big Sale Illuminati, episode 4. And today we are going to talk about the money machine, which is all about the sales process that drives money. Now, first of all, you have to understand what a machine is, right? What's a machine supposed to do? I mean, a machine's supposed to generate some efficiency. It's going to give you some transparency. It should be ever improving, and it should give you a better yield on what you do. Before we go into that, we all like machines. Everybody lives with machines. I ask our group here, got a favorite machine?
Weightlifting machine.
Weightlifting machine. Wouldn't have seen that. That would not have been what my first guess would have been. Who else?
I'm going to say my iPhone as a machine.
Ooh, iPhone's a good one.
My favorite sales machine is a 6'4" egomaniac that flies around the world meeting with CEOs, swilling bourbon with freakishly white teeth.
I didn't see that one coming, Mark Kennedy.
No, I thought you might be an android. I wasn't convinced until just this moment that you might be a machine. My machine is an espresso machine. And I tell you, it's the first machine I see every morning. Mark, leave that alone. All right, let's get started. So let's talk about the idea of what's happening in the marketplace. CEOs are putting at the top of their list, greatest amount of concern is their sales process, what we would refer to as their money machine. When everybody here is talking to CEOs, what are they saying about that? What does it mean to them? And how do you feel those concerns are playing out?
I can take this if you want to start. So I fill that role with my organization, and straight out of the chute, we did a recap of last year of our leadership team and our executive team. And we basically sat down and we talked about what went well and what didn't well over the course of the year. And we have a very kind of an open, freewheeling democratic process. And the number one most important shortcoming we had for the entire year was failure to follow our own sales process and all the downstream complications that created in terms of customer churn, ultimately employee churn, loss of potential revenue, bad morale, negative juju in the marketplace, all those things. So that lack of adherence, which is especially painful to me because I installed it not only once, but twice, is especially difficult. But for many of the reasons that I explained during my favorite machine, that sales process also has some challenges with it as it comes to bringing in a prospect to the organization and really preparing the company for that partnership.
Hey, Mark, a quick question for you. So if I'm a sales rep and there is a process that's getting stuck, how do I, as just the sales rep, not the manager, not the head of the company, work to show that higher up or to try to get that fixed? Because what I find is that the process, there's going to be points in there that are sticky for people. And how do folks bring that to the attention of others to actually try to fix it?
Well, we use a process where we look at what's called movement versus motion in our sales process. So what we're looking for is we're looking for people who are actually moving as opposed to people that are making a whole bunch of motion but not going anywhere. And so we have a kind of a stage gate process. And when deals, they have a certain acceptable latency period in a given stage before you need to dig in and figure out what's really not going right. So for a given salesperson, when they're going through the process of reviewing their deals on a weekly and ultimately a monthly basis, they can escalate like, hey, we're running into this problem here. What we do know, and I don't know if we get into this, but every stage gate in our process has there's really 4 dimensions of success. There's who from our side needs to show up, what information do we need to bring And on the client side, who do we map up on the client side, and what information do we expect them to bring? Where we get into trouble is where we are not articulate enough and demanding enough of the customer in terms of what people need to show up on their side and what information they need to bring. When they think that they can wing it, or they expect a salesperson to just show up and pitch, that's where things go bad for us. So when they escalate, we have those escalation points built naturally into the system, but it doesn't mean that, at times they don't fall on deaf ears.
Sales leadership, I work with a lot of sales leaders who, and more often than not, it's CEOs and CFOs and et cetera. You have this latency that you're speaking to. Each of the stages has an amount of time it should take. You can't say on Monday, I want a proposal on Tuesday, when the client won't give you the information until Wednesday. But it doesn't seem to matter. The CEO gets up to the elevator, pushes as many times as they can to see if they can't get the elevator down. And by just yelling at the machine, they think the machine will move faster. So that's a place where the sales machines or the sales processes have a tendency to work against each other, and just the sales rep stops answering their phones because they just know it's going to be from the company yelling at them.
I'd throw a question back at Tiffany. I'd say, from the seat that you sit in as an executive buyer, how much do you feel a sales process? I'm sure some organizations are very explicit around what the process looks like and where you're at in it. And other folks, I wonder if you're just wandering in the wilderness on an information gathering chase. Do you feel a sales process as a buyer?
The good ones I don't feel. The bad ones are painful, because a good sales process to me is one where I just know it's moving forward and I'm getting what I want, versus I've got to keep asking, keep following up. I have questions when something comes to me. I get a new person. I'm not sure who they are. Tom, you asked about kind of this machine and this process and what CEOs are asking in their concern. For me, it's kind of, where's the closer? Because you need a closer in that sales process. And that's why I always have my coffee cup here on the show. Coffee is for closers. I've had it for years. But one of the best machines that I was ever involved in was when I worked for Baxter, and we were selling capital equipment and general laboratory equipment. This was years ago in my career. And they were definitely market leaders in the laboratory space. And the reason why is because it goes back to what Mark was saying about communication throughout the process, and then the specialist and the ability to really give that customer what they needed when. So there was a generalist who was also a closer, but they were the relationship in the account. They were in the account. They were part of the process, really within the laboratory, had all of the connections. And when they needed to purchase some capital equipment, something that was specialized, we would bring in a specialist specifically for that. And that communication of what the generalist did, where they brought it down into the sale, bringing the specialist in, teaming then at that point, and it was very clear on who would do the contract, who would do the pricing, who would present, and it utilized everybody's strengths.
Let me interrupt you for just a second, Tiffany. As you said, it's seamless, but you are setting an expectation. The specialist will be coming at the next meeting. Bring your specialist to that conversation. In the agenda, I'm going to need to have your money person there, and et cetera. So you don't feel it, but also the person who's buying should at least understand what their expectations are for the next meeting. They may not see what the third meeting is away, but expectations are set for the next meeting.
Yes, absolutely. And when it works well, it works great. When it falls apart, it falls apart.
Wait, should we unpack this? What is CEOs have pain around the sales process? Isn't it ultimately we have to take it a step further and say, what is their sales process? And what is the visibility that the CEO and everybody underneath him has into that process? Because I think sometimes people will raise their hand and say, we're in pain because whatever, but it's the visibility that is part of the pain. They're not set up to have everything integrated. Let me give you an example. Like, we work with multiple technology companies, and the metrics, the KPIs that the salespeople have versus what the marketing people have, it's as if you were talking to two different companies. They're reporting out on leads completely differently. They're reporting out on conversions completely differently. They're reporting out on pipeline and and opportunities in a different way. And I ask myself, whose fault is that? Now, meanwhile, they have all of the best automation tools. They have the Eloquas. They have the top of the line lead generation funnel, CRMs and CMS. I mean, everything is presumably talking to itself, but yet two different sets of people in the same organization. This is right now, my life is two clients just like this, two different sets of data. Now, the C-suite is all over the marketing people asking them why that they're not driving more leads. It's like a Glenn Ross bad horror movie.
To your point about CRMs, there is this idea that if I throw enough CRM water at the sales minions out there, things will get better. And I always look at it as you're on the ground and you're watching the contrails go through the sky, watching the airplane. And CRMs are great, not telling you where we started and not telling you where we're going, but watching what's happening along the way.
Well, I think we need to unpack that for our listeners, because I think if you're a chief revenue officer listening to this podcast, you're going to be like, okay, I need solutions. I already know what my problems are. You guys are affirming that my company is not as effed up as everybody else's. Great. Thanks. But then beyond that, what do we do? Right. So is it that we've got, automation and CRM comfort? Like we're just, put some more in there. I touch base with the client, sent them an email today. Bing! Like, is that enough?
Well, I mean, this is where Mark was going on this, and this idea of motion versus movement. Maybe take that another step forward, Mark.
We're big sale business to business. I think that's why I got invited to the BSI podcast. So I'm starting to figure that out now. I think I've been hoodwinked. So when we start working, like our cost of customer acquisition is high because the back end side from a lifetime value is insanely high as a proportion. So those are some of the important, macro metrics that drive what we do. But my company creates a tremendous change on the client side in terms of how they engage with their audiences. And I know that sounds basic, but basic changes are huge changes when you talk about big companies. So I'm basically taking the old peso model and flipping it on its head and saying, we're going to start with the owned assets first. And you're going to do direct audience engagement, not through intermediaries anymore. That's something that requires a significant executive sponsorship on the client side. So where that starts to wane is when the stage gate process breaks down for us. Because as we get farther away from that visionary that says, yeah, I want to give that a swing, I think there's something there. As we start to get 1 and 2 degrees removed from those people, which is what you have to do in big companies to get anything done, I need to get from the C-suite to some directors that are trying to make their way to the VP level. And that's where everything kind of gets stuck. So in my movement versus motion world, the struggle is constantly revisiting the executive endorsement to work through the business case that will ultimately lead into a program that can change that customer's trajectory. But that's the dynamic where I'm working with the sales reps, or where, when Tiffany says, how are you working with, how do you get that escalation point? The answer is when they get stuck is what I wind up having to get back involved. And I'm kind of usually that bridge to the C-suite. And that's where, having those lines of conduct, having the baseline understanding of relationship, establishing the threshold of performance that's required to justify change. All those things are really crucial in unsticking the sales process and moving that opportunity to the next stage. I mean, for us, building the business case for why this happens is really with the customer's data. I can go in and wing it on my own from the first meeting.
But speed per stage is speed to close, right? And so Monique's talking about the fact of the flailing around of, and I've got hundreds of meetings of, I called this person, I sent that email off, I'm going to do this. And your answer is, where did we go? Every one of those touches is not important if it doesn't give us progress. And that's that stage gate piece that you're talking about on that side, because otherwise it's just noise. Tiffany, I've got to believe that your voicemail or email or text or whatever lights up if someone's chasing you for a deal. Like they're chasing you like you owe them money.
They would like me to have to pay them for something. Yes, but one thing that I want to get back to, and Mark, I really like this motion versus movement. I think that's really crucial, because it's like there can be a lot of smoke, but if there isn't that fire there, then it's really just smoke. But I want to go back to something that Monique said, because I think it's really important. Monique, when you were talking about the example where the way that the metrics were done was different for sales and marketing. The goals were different for sales and marketing. I think that that leads to disaster. If those goals and the metrics aren't the same, so that there's that one source of truth, nothing irritates me more than a presentation where someone will get up and show numbers, and then someone from another department gets up and shows different numbers for the same thing.
That's exactly what happened at that QBR just a week ago.
Yeah, there's one source of truth. Let's make sure we know what it is and all agree that that is where we're going to go for that. And everybody's goals need to be aligned. Unaligned goals is the fastest way to unravel anything within an organization. So I think that that also is very, very crucial in being able to move things forward within an organization.
Can I ask you a question as an executive buyer? I want to just throw something at Tiffany for a second, because this is the source of my personal frustration all the time as coming in through the marketing side and having, if you will, tangential relationships with the sales organizations. I always say, if you get hit them by, what is that expression? I always mess up expressions, but it's something like, get them by the wallets and their hearts and minds will follow. And, I was going to say something else, but no.
Yeah, right.
No.
Yeah, exactly.
Like dating advice.
No, I was going to say wallets. No, really, I was. But we know where the wallet is. Anyway, the point is that compensation doesn't align with the behavior that you want from your people, right? So whose fault is that? That the salespeople are being compensated for every point solution that they sell. So they're going to be compensated on bandwidth and, Wi-Fi, and then they're going to be compensated on equipment, and then they sell this way, but meanwhile the CEO is like, I want a global story and messaging about how strategic we are. And meanwhile, like, your salespeople are being driven by a monthly quota that mandates that they have motion.
Then your reward system is wrong.
Right.
I'm gonna stick in right there where you said it, Tiffany. Charlie Munger is famous for saying that show me the incentive and I'll show you the performance. And that really,
there you go.
Yeah. And that's really where, and so by the way, to your point, Monique, if you give me 4 different incentives, right, then you're going to get 4 kind of murky difference of performance.
Right. We're supposed to be the big sales Illuminati, right? So if we look at the point of big sales, they're not transactional. They're longer term. They take a longer run. There's a longer runway. So if you compensate your people with short-term behavior goals, how are you going to build that muscle for strategic buying and selling? How are you going to build that cadence and that patience for, this is how long a big sale takes? Of course, you're supposed to have multiple big sales in the pipeline. I get that. But I feel like I see the mixed messages that the salespeople are getting and the marketing people, because they're being compensated for short-term activity.
What's your cycle time? When you start to look at the cycle times, do you have an average?
So the cycle times of my clients, right? So let's look at that.
That's right.
Right. So the average cycle time is 6. We have figured out. So this is a new piece of information for 2 of our clients. Their cycle time went from pandemic, time. It was 3 to 6 months. It's now 10 to 18 months for their close rate. So again, if my client had certain tools in place to be able to report on that, what's the conversion and when did this person first engage, to Mark's point, and when did they finally sign a contract? That was almost an 18-month process for a recent deal that was pretty sizable. So the point is that the salespeople were paid, basically that sale was given up. It was saved by marketing completely by accident, because it was another automation touch point that they responded to finally.
I was just going to ask Mark what his cycle time was inside of, and again, the minute you've got a qualified opportunity to the point that you have an inked contract.
Right now, it's less than 120 days. No, I'm going to give you a different qualification. The boundaries are, once I have a qualified executive sponsor saying, yep, I'm not going to do business with you but I'm willing to tackle this problem. From that point forward, we get, for closed won deals, we're inside of 120 days to get to procurement. And once you finally get to procurement, where you're negotiating your MSAs and your final T's and C's and all that, I mean, that can take various degrees of time, and who knows? I mean, that's beyond. But we're under 120 days, and most of our closed won deals are 90 days, in that range.
Now, just to qualify what I said, Tom, it's from the point that a lead has indicated interest to the time that lead says, yes, I'm going to buy you.
And so I always break it up into two pieces. I think you and I have talked about this before. I break it up into when you become a qualified lead.
Yeah, see, that's what Mark is talking about, qualified lead. I'm talking about sort of like a higher.
Right. Qualified lead, that's the sales type cycle I'm talking about. It could be the other way around. Getting to a qualified lead.
That takes forever.
It takes forever. Yeah.
Well, again, if you're sitting in the marketing seat, like most of my clients, your metrics and your KPIs are, when did the person raise their finger to say, oh, you're interesting as a brand. Let me reach out and see if I can download a piece of content or read one of your white papers or download one of your points of view or look at a podcast or whatever that interest behavior indicator is. That's different for the salespeople. Are like, this guy's dead to me because he hasn't done anything. The marketing people is, he's alive and I'm going to touch him 7 more times.
Yeah. Marketing people do see persistence as when they're moving through generating a qualified lead. There is a value to that persistence. There's, it's a noisy world, right? So sometimes your message doesn't get through on the first bounce. It takes several kind of a drip campaign to get that through. And as you said, you talked about a white paper here, podcast there, whatever it is that eventually intrigues someone to open the door and have a meaningful meeting.
Hey, one of the things I want to go back to a little bit is every factory, at least most of them, have some people inside of them, as opposed to completely automation factories. And I want to throw something, Tiffany said something earlier, where at some point in the process that she's been either subjected to or had the pleasure of participating in, there's been a relationship person that shows up. I have a crazy idea about relationships that I'll throw at Tiffany. I want to hear what she thinks. I don't want you to like my salespeople. I don't want you to like them personally. What do you think about that?
So I think that I need to like someone in your company. Because if I don't, I'm not spending my time with you. So if it's someone who's really annoying, if they have something that absolutely nobody else has that is far superior to everything else, and I'll probably never find that out because they're too annoying for me to actually get that from them. But there has to be some type of likability for me. That's an important piece.
What's your tenure in your role?
I was CEO in 2006, I believe. 2005, 2006. Long time.
The reason I say that is, so the people we sell to are typically chief marketing officers and heads of performance marketing. So their tenure is fairly short. You hear all this anecdotal information. I think the latest real data I saw was about 34 months is the average tenure of a Fortune 500 chief marketing officer. So somebody once wrote an interesting article called Selling to the Doomed, and that's who they are. So they need obviously quick results. And what I try to work with and impress upon the people that work for me is the basis of an executive relationship is not that they like you. As a matter of fact, I don't want them to make decisions based on whether or not they look upon you fondly. I want them to make decisions based upon, do they look at you and depend on you? Do they depend on you to generate outcomes that's going to keep them above 34 months or going to drive them out before 34 months? And that's really so when you talk about the relationship person showing up, our relationship people are the ones who show up and are able to make the assurances because we've done the data and the detail ahead of time so that you can bank on it. That's kind of why I asked about tenure and relationship. I think it's important. Like, I don't want you to dislike the folks there, but I was one time I got to go to a class at the Harvard Business School. It was back during 2000. It was 2009. It was a course called Leading Professional Services Firms, and it was fascinating. It was a week-long course in their executive education thing, and you had 200 people in a room, and they were kind of going through and they were teaching you basically all the the big macro issues around leading big professional services firms. And that night they had a time that the one day they have these in the evenings they have these like people come in from government and Wall Street and whatever and talk about what they were doing. And at the time, with the financial crisis was going down, they brought in, it was the Treasury Secretary. He came in and he was talking about it. And they were asking, they said, like, they were talking about what the next person, this person was the previous one, like what the next person needed to be in that role. And the guy's like, he looks and he goes, the smartest person in the world. Because we could literally overlook a lot of moral shortcomings for the right person in the role. It's it. He's like, the relationship side is out the door. We need horsepower and we need outcomes. So I thought that was a really interesting way of they were going like, we just need incredible competency in moments when things are critical.
Yeah, I consider that trusted advisor kind of a role, which is someone that I would like. So, for me, relationships can, take on kind of different levels in different periods of time. But if you've got someone who's a trusted advisor, you trust that information, their personality might not be someone that you want to go out and have dinner with, but you trust them because you trust their information and what they're providing you with.
Well, so we use a 6-layer approach to that issue of trusted advisor. In this case, it's just the issue of trust. And you can't move something forward until you get to the third level. And the third level, without going through the entire model, bottom line meets both of your criteria. Show me expertise and value, all right? And then I trust you enough that when you say it, I believe I'm talking to an expert who's adding value to me. And so if I can't get level 1 and 2, which is just a reasonable perspective, a reasonable attitude and rather than being annoying or whatever, you should be able to weed out annoying because they're never annoying in just one direction. They're annoying everywhere. So you should be able to figure that out inside your own organization. Once you get to that level, trust is the key piece. Monique, you're looking a little, I don't know if it's because you're in Paris. Most of the people in Paris are actually look down at you anyway if you're an American. So I don't know if that's the reason, but what's your perspective on this? Because you'd spend a lot of time generating an image for your clients of their expertise, their uniqueness in the marketplace, their whatever. How do you accomplish that?
I think there's a couple things that people are saying here that we're all saying about, the personal brand of the person that you're dealing with or the person that you're selling to. Mark being, selling to the CMOs who are on a shot clock. He's absolutely right about that. At one point, the tenure was 18.3 months. It went down to that. So they have a lot to accomplish in a short period of time, which makes them one of two things, depending on their persona, their personality. They can either be risk averse and then they don't do anything and they just stonewall stuff,
or they're going to be balls out. Let's do what, if they're going to find a trusted advisor or vendor that's going to say, you know what, we can really make an impact in a short period of time and turn your organization a little upside down, which I think is probably the kind of organization that would resonate with Mark's, service offerings, because he's very revolutionary for a brand. So you have to have a CMO that's not risk averse in order to, champion that.
But we're not all dealing with the CM, we're not all dealing with the C-level people. So if you go down to, vice presidents and beyond that, there's a huge turnover in the age. This one, the interview pieces that I was doing with someone, I said, who are you seeing now? What are the kinds of people that you're seeing now? And his answer in the interview is, Tom, they're coming in, they don't know very much, and they're very young. So a large part of our value has to show up in gently teaching them their own business without, even though you may be the smartest person in the room, you're going to push people off if you start off with, let me explain to you all the stupid stuff you're doing. But this turnover is real as far as age and attitude and level of information and experience. And so I think about the things we're talking about on the shot clocks and the windows and et cetera. As you go down the organization, I don't know if that shot clock changes or it goes down. Tiffany, Monique was going to go with something with that, and I interjected on a different direction. What were you going to add to that, Monique?
I think that we should unpack that a little bit more. It's the idea of vendors, trusted advisors coming in to educate those who don't know what they don't know and have it be their idea or their win, not ours. So I'd love to have, Tiffany weigh in on that. But when I succeed, it's when my client, positions it as their idea and they get all the accolades and I get a big, green thing that's depositable in the bank and I don't care.
Yeah, exactly. I think when it becomes someone else's idea, then they embrace it. They become the champion, as Mark was talking about, because it's important to them. I do think that given what's happened during COVID with a lot of people moving very quickly within organizations, that we're going to continue to see that. So, Tom, I think you're right in looking at people are going to be coming in. They might have less experience within that company. So how do you provide them with some of the education that can help them to be successful? I think that will become more and more important as the spinning cycle of people and churn continues.
We teach a lot about the idea of going faster than, but not too fast. Meaning that, if you're ahead of them in, one amount of information, then they're following you and seeing you as an expert. If you jump way ahead of them as far as the information that you're providing, at that point, you're either intimidating or they think that you're not relevant to them. And so you're taking them along this journey. And so you're trying to set pace in your education. Your best people, in my opinion, can hear that and understand that. They don't just say everything they know all at once because they know a great deal, and the person behind the screen, so to speak, is saying, I can't, I don't have no idea. And then the answer is I don't think that really fits here. You scared them. And in Mark's business, that's a great risk. I mean, you guys can blow away people as far as information.
Yeah, I had a CMO of a brand everyone knows tell me the other day that what you can yield is too much. We need to slow down. We need to understand it. We need to see how it's going to make the rest of the programs that we're investing money in be called completely into question, which is going to be destabilizing for our team.
We had talked earlier on the Slack back channel about this issue of yield. Can you kind of jump into that a little bit?
Speed to yield in terms of?
Well, you were just talking about the fact that, in the conversations that you're dealing with, a lot of it is this conversation of yield, and you're having to move through that at a particular pace that the people who are buying from you can keep up.
Yeah. So I think there's two elements of what you're asking. The first is the information lead that you have to be one step, but not two, because if you're two steps, you're either disconnected or you look erratic. And I think that's important. You can get too far down the path of your own story. And if they're not right behind you, that's where things go really poorly. And then the second element of yield in our world is, most organizations they look at their marketing spends, and we're in the marketing spend business. So either return on marketing spend, ROMs, or return on advertising spend, ROAS, or one of those metrics, or there's a handful of other ones, but they're looking in for those numbers in those ranges of 3 and above. And, we run into programs where we can reduce acquisition costs by, I can literally get you customers for 15 to 25 cents on the dollar. And people look at that and they're like, oh my God, what does that mean for my other channels and from a comparison perspective? And that's where we have to be really, I've learned that we have to be a lot more nuanced and almost muted in how we go through that process, because, I think, years and years ago when I worked with Tom and we were going through some of these value claims, which is if you get more than about 25% better than their current approach, you start to make all the previous approaches look bad. And therefore organizational lock will set in where people will protect their, they'll circle the wagons and they'll protect what they've been doing for years because no one wants to look bad in the organization. So that's one of the reasons that we talk about like executive sponsorship being so crucial, which is I'm bringing something that's a new way of thinking and really exposing to someone that the way they've been thinking about audience engagement their whole career is sort of fundamentally wrong. And they know it's wrong. They feel like it's wrong, but they've also done it forever and been successful at it. So it's just one of those really difficult human transformations you go through. Therefore the yield conversation, it's crazy, but it's a couple of times I've been really close to putting really significant deals in place. And I've gotten to the end and the yield being too high has actually been a barrier to success. I know that's insane, but it's true.
Same thing happens in manufacturing. It's not unusual in manufacturing to have some of the same challenges. Our manufacturing clients and the engineers who are involved with those walk in and they want to say, these guys they're just doing stupid things here. I mean, it's like having a plumber. Anybody ever had a plumber in their house who came in and say, wow, I can't believe the other plumber was here. They did such a great job. Every plumber walks in and talks about the last plumber as a bloody idiot, right? Well, it's the same thing, because they're all engineers. So you go into an engineering circumstance and you say, all these gauges that you've got in here through this entire system right here are all shit. So you need to replace all of them and you'll get a 50% lift. Who wants to step up to that? Nobody, because there's a bunch of engineers in there who signed off on these particular gauges and et cetera. So you have to demonstrate a yield that is palatable to the people who are the ones running those particular machines.
Yeah, it's the rate of change at which the organization is actually able to absorb the change without destroying the value that it has today. And that is a real stepwise approach. Sometimes you can maybe get those quantum leaps, which is great, but to get to that quantum leap, it may take a little bit longer because you've got to get that whole organization behind you. I always had a little phrase to myself that I would say, my company can only change at the rate that it's able to. Because if I want it to change faster, a lot of things need to happen, but sometimes just the ability of people to absorb, to change, to try something new, maybe it requires new machinery, whatever that may be. So I really do think that there is a lot there at the rate that someone can change. I think that's a valid question also when you're in the sales cycle. And Mark, I don't know if you ever had the conversation when the yield was too high at, what type of a yield is something that the organization can absorb.
I will tell you this. I've been, I think the right word is lusting after a tier one home and auto property casualty originator. And I dug into one particular one, which is the one that I've been lusting after for a while. And I'll even say the name, it's Progressive Insurance. And they're such an incredible marketing machine. I mean, they create Dr. Rick, his Flo is Progressive. I think Flo is also, like they're the modern day soap operas, but in the form of a commercial. They're also incredible online advertisers. They spend tens of millions of dollars every month on paid search and on digital advertising. The problem I have with them is the yield that I could generate is so high that I would have to charge them so much to get it in range of their acceptable parameters. It would be obscene. So it's almost like it's embarrassing to have the conversation with them. For 10 cents on the dollar, I could get as much as they spend in $20 million a month in paid search. It's insane. But that's the barrier.
And you think about how many people are behind all of the decisions that gave us Flo and others. By the way, separate conversation at some point. I met Flo. All right. She doesn't look anything like, I met her before she was going on. She doesn't look anything like that. And the Flo that you see. And, So not that that really matters. It does make a difference in makeup, and I'm going to go ahead and get that done for me. But anyway, to your point, and your lust, which is something uncomfortable for me. So, I mean, anyway.
Where we started.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Where we started the session. And we are coming to a close, but that idea of yield being, remarkably high, I know Tiffany well enough that she's had people who walk in and say, I can do, something, and immediately goes, no, you can't. No, you can't. I got a lot of smart people. I got a lot of smart people working for me. And, you're giving me this much information upon which I'm supposed to make this amount of decision. Because you say you're better. I got 3 graphs that show I'm better. Ta-da! And Tiffany can't turn her entire organization on a dime like that. So I'm speaking for you, Tiffany, but does that resonate?
I think whenever there's something that maybe I don't fully believe that it could happen, the word pilot is a little secret word, because piloting allows the ability to try it, to see. A pilot without some type of a guarantee behind it for that person that's going to pilot it isn't probably very good. But it does allow that comfort level and that extra step between status quo and very radically different. Let's see what this pilot does. And usually you can find a group within the organization that will champion the pilot.
At some point, we're going to delve into the idea of selling past the pilot, because oftentimes what teams do, sales teams do, and individuals do, is they sell to the pilot and then wait the results of the pilot to get to the very end and then begin to sell again. And you have to sell past the pilot and through the pilot to get the end deal. If you just say, we're running a pilot and let's see what happens as a sales organization or as a performance organization, step back, you're reselling all over again. So,
Tiffany, do you have any recall on how many times your pilot or your proof of concept would have converted to an actual program? Or did they typically not work out? And it was just a buyer's way of saying, you know what, we're going to put one toe in the water, but not both feet.
Most of the pilots were brought up internally, and then we would seek externals to help us with it.
Got it.
And if I remember back, I would say maybe 50-50. Maybe that's being too generous. Maybe it was more 30% worked. It really requires that champion who's doing the pilot, and then attention back up to what the changes are, because then it also allows you to tweak some things in there too.
Well, so I'm going to close this out. I'm just going to say we talked a lot about the money machine here, the sales machine. We talked about all of the or variety of the chunks along the way. This is an ongoing conversation, because some of the times we talked about pilots, we talked about marketing, we talked about decision makers, we talked about buyers. And inside of that, we're going to have to dive just a little bit deeper and say, organizationally, how do you make each of the steps work inside of the machine? And that'll be one of our episodes in the future. But for today, thanks, everybody. Good job. Good session.
Thanks for listening to the Big Sale Illuminati podcast. If you like this episode, give us a thumbs up and let us know in the comments. Also, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're listening on. Until our next episode, best wishes on your big sales.